What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and even though some of you told me don't do the top 10 video, take a break, that's not how I roll. So it's top 10 Thursday, and it's time for my top 10 level 4 spells. So thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for voting for this as the topic for this week. If you want to join in on that yourself, you can go over and join the Patreon. There's a link in the description. Also, if you like what I do here, think about subscribing to the channel and turning on notification bells. I stay on top of as much D&D news as I can, and ringing that notification bell is probably the best way to make sure you get that content as soon as it comes out. So what are the rules? Well, they got to be a 4th level spell, and they got to be official content from 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. We're going to go to D&D Beyond, we're going to sort by 4th level spells, and we're going to pick my top 10. There was a couple runner-ups that didn't make it on this list. Level 4 is interesting. I feel like level 3 is great, and level 5 is great, and 4 is kind of middling, but with some good control and utility spells. So if you want to see what they are, stay tuned. Number 10. Death Ward. It is a really useful spell. It's not particularly flashy, which is why it's so high on this list. It's also not on a ton of spell lists, or at least not a lot of spell lists without being as specific to a subclass. You can see it's Cleric and Paladin, definitely. And then it's on certain spell lists. So, right, Life Domain is, any of the domains are clerics, so they could get it normally anyway. It's just auto-prepared. The Undying Warlock, which is the worst warlock in the game and no one ever really plays. The Alchemist Artificer, which is pretty solid, and then the Undead Warlock, which is the significantly better version. But what it does is it is an action to cast, and it lasts for 8 hours, which is the nice part. It's 8 hours, not concentration. And if you touch a creature, basically you give them what they call a measure of protection from death, and it's the next time they would go to 0 hit points from taking damage, they go to 1 instead. If the spell is still in effect when a target is subjected to an effect that would kill it instantaneously without dealing damage, the effect is instead negated against the target and the spell ends. For this, it means something like, let's say, Power Word Kill, right? Immediately kills you if you are under a certain a number of hit points. I think it's under 100 hit points, you immediately die. That means, in this case, Death Ward would stop it, but Death Ward would end. So, again, it's a useful spell. It's just, you know, like I said, it's not particularly flashy, but you'll be excited to have it on you when the time comes. Number 9. Fire Shield. Fire Shield is a spell that, again, in theory, I've only ever really gotten a chance to use it, I think, once in a campaign. I used it one time, and then that campaign kind of fizzled out. Not a direct correlation, I promise you. Typically only accessible by the Wizard all the time, and then a couple of subclasses: Fiend Pack Warlock, Battlesmith and Armor Artificer, Genie Warlock, and Circle of Wildfire Druid. And this is another one that's nice because it is a longer duration in 10 minutes, and it is also non-concentration. And basically, I remember hearing about one of the times I first heard the spell sounding really cool was that I think in a Drizzt novel this shows up, but basically, you wreathe your body in flames that shed light, 10-foot bright, 10-foot dim, and they provide you with either a warm shield or a chill shield. You have to choose when you cast it. The warm shield grants you resistance to cold damage, and the chill shield grants you resistance to fire damage. In addition, whenever a creature within 5 feet of you hits you with a melee attack, the shield erupts in flames. The attacker takes 2d8 fire damage from a warm shield. Remember, the warm shield is the one that gives you resistance to cold damage, or 2d8 cold damage from the cold shield, which is the one that gives you resistance to fire. And this is nice if you have an opportunity to get this set up before a combat and you are a melee person. Again, it's on a wizard, so like maybe if you're a blade singer and you can get this up ahead of time, it's nice because if you're going to be in melee, this is sort of an always-on damage thing that you don't need to worry about. Like, it's just there and it does the damage. So you're in weaving with your blade and you're attacking. Someone manages to get through your blade song, your shield, and everything and hit you, well, then they're going to take 2d8 damage. Again, that's an example of it, but for other ones, like maybe the armor or some of the other ones that might take hits more often, I guess that's something you need to consider too, right? Fire Shield is only useful if you get hit. If you're never going to get hit, Fire Shield is useful for the resistances it provides, but other than that, the kind of consistent damage output that you'd be doing would be useless if your AC is high enough that you're never taking hits. And it is with a melee attack, so unfortunately spell attacks don't work and AoEs don't work. I just really, really like this spell a lot. I just wish I got a chance to use it more often. Number 8. Now, Arcane Eye is a spell that I have used in several situations to great effect. Again, typically only a wizard spell, but accessible through the knowledge domain and arcana domains for the cleric, and I guess it is on the artificer list as well. I really like this spell, especially if you could have it automatically prepared like an arcana cleric or a knowledge cleric, because it's not something like, in my mind, it's very useful when you have it, but ideally I'd like to not have to prepare a spell slot to use it, so if I can get it automatically prepared, that's pretty big. But it is 1 action to cast, it has a range of 30 feet initially, and then it's concentration for up to an hour, and this is the ultimate recon spell. So you create an invisible magical eye within range, which is again that 30 feet, and it hovers there for the duration. You mentally receive visual information from the eye, which has normal vision and dark vision out to 30 feet, and it can look in every single direction. I still have a hard time wrapping around how you are able to perceive through the eye that can see 360 degrees when you cannot, but the spell doesn't put that much thought into it. So as an action, you can move the eye up to 30 feet in any direction. There is no limit to how far away from you the eye can move, but it can't enter another plane of existence. A solid barrier blocks its movement, but it can pass through an opening as small as an inch in diameter. So this, I mean, if you look underneath a door, an inch in diameter is like a standard door. For more often than not, will be a standard sort of gap under a door or through a keyhole or something like that, depending on how you have this set up. But this is great if you're in a location and you don't want to use something like Scrying, which is a higher level spell and only shows you like an individual or some small scope. You can basically find a spot to hold up, cast Arcane Eye, and then just see through the eye and have it move through wherever you're going to go and basically give you a full layout of the location as best as you can get. I've done this in my games where, as a player, I've been able to do this, where I sat down and used my Arcane Eye and basically got the full layout of the dungeon we were going to go in by sending my Arcane Eye through it first and then drawing out a map for the party saying, okay, this is where we need to go. So I really like this spell. Again, the limited spell list and the fact that I don't get to play too often, and when I get to play Wizard even less than that, means that I don't usually have access to it, and I wouldn't feel like spending a magical secrets to gain access to it. Number 7. Evard's Black Tentacles. Again, a wizard spell, and then also accessible through the Great Old One Warlock. This spell is really interesting because it's great at dealing damage and battlefield control, and it does it in a way that I feel like, at least initially, back in the day, was super good because people didn't realize how it worked exactly. So it is a 90-foot range, and then it is a 20-foot square of the area is filled with the black tentacles. So out to 90 feet, and then a 20-foot square. It is concentration for a minute, but it does some interesting stuff. So for the duration, these tentacles turn that area, that 20-foot square, into difficult terrain, so having movement. When a creature enters the area for the first time on a turn or starts its turn there, they must succeed a dex save or take 3d6 bludgeoning damage and be restrained by the tentacles. So the thing is, if they succeed on the saving throw, they don't take any damage and they're not restrained, if I'm reading that right. And it says a creature that starts its turn in the area and is already restrained by the tentacles just takes the 3d6 damage. But here's the kicker. A creature that is restrained by the tentacles can use an action to make a strength or dexterity check against the spell save DC. On its success, it frees itself. It's not a strength or dexterity saving throw. It's not an athletics or an acrobatics check. It's a strength or dexterity check. This means that you could potentially set up something like Hex and give someone disadvantage on strength checks, and then drop an Evard's Black Tentacles on them. Obviously not on the same turn, but if you were able to do that, then they'd have disadvantage on the strength checks to escape it. Again, checks don't provide proficiencies. They're not affected by things like a paladin's aura. So the chances of your saving throw DC may be a lot higher which is what the number is based off of, than their ability to roll just a straight strength or dexterity check. So it has a potential to do solid, consistent damage each turn, and all the better if you can cast this in a 20-foot cube room, like open a door, drop it in the room, and then the entire room is filled with it, so they're gonna start their turn there. And if you can shut the door, even better, because then they can't get out, and then the tentacles just slowly kill them. Number 6. Polymorph. I don't think I really need to explain the immense amount of utility that this spell gets. It's not one of my personal favorite spells, but I know a lot of people love it, and I do recognize the mass amount of utility that it does have, right? It's an action to cast, a range of 60 feet, and it has duration of 1 hour, concentration. And it has a lot of different things you can do with it, right? You can basically transform a creature into a beast of some kind, right? So, an unwilling creature must make a wisdom saving throw to avoid it. It has no effect on a shape changer, a creature with 0 hit points. It lasts for the duration up to an hour, or until the target drops to 0 hit points or dies. The new form can be any beast whose challenge rating is equal to or less than the target, or the target's level if it doesn't have a challenge rating. Remember, it's the target, not the caster. The target's game statistics, including mental ability scores, are replaced by the statistics of the chosen beast. It retains its alignment and personality. This is something important. If you watch Critical Role Campaign 2, you'll know some fun things happened with transforming into a moth. But basically, that's something I feel like everybody forgets. It says they keep their alignment and their personality. Again, alignment in 5th edition is kind of pointless, but it's still here in this because this is kind of a legacy. So if I turn you into a crocodile, well, you technically have a reptile brain now, right? You have a crocodile's brain. You're still you. You still have your alignment and, quote, your personality, but as a crocodile. So I feel like every time anybody does this to turn into, more often than not, a T-Rex is the big one that everybody goes for. You have the intelligence of a T-Rex, but you have your personality, so it's that interesting, like, do I know my party members? I don't know. I mean, most people, I think, just turn it into a transformation so that they can make it useful for them. I don't know what the plans for rules as written and intended were, but I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. How do you handle Polymorph at your table? They assume the new hit points of this form, and similar to a wild shape, they return to their normal hit points, reverts to its normal form. They return to the number of hit points they had. If a revert drops them to 0 and then carries over, the original form takes that damage. The creature is limited in its actions it can perform by the nature of its new form. It can't speak, cast spells, or take any action that requires hands or speech. The gear melds into the new form. The creature can activate, use, wield, or otherwise benefit from any of its equipment. So it has its ups and downs. It's a great kind of oh shit button where you can use it to give yourself a ton of extra hit points. You can use it to turn the enemy into like a chicken or a caterpillar or something so that you have an hour to figure out what you want to do. There's the ever-present, turn them into something small and then throw them in the bag of holding, shut the bag of holding, and then they suffocate inside there because eventually the bag of holding runs out of air. Different options, but again, Polymorph is useful and has a lot of potential depending on how you use it and what your DM will allow. Number 5. Dimension Door. This is one of my personal favorite spells. I've gotten to use this in a handful of different campaigns as different characters, sometimes from Capes of the Mountebank, but a lot of the time based on if I have a class that can get Dimension Door, I take it, which Bard, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard can get access to it, as well as the Oath of Vengeance, and interesting is the Trickery domain, which is a cleric getting access to Dimension Door. I realized I didn't talk about who has Polymorph, but we moved on. It is an action to cast, it's instantaneous, and you teleport 500 feet. Unlike things you'd have access to earlier on, like say a Misty Step, you don't need to see where you're going. You can just choose a direction and say, I want to go 300 feet that way, and it happens, right? Teleport yourself to a spot within range, again, 500 feet. You arrive at exactly the spot desired. It can be a place you can see, one you can visualize, or one you can describe by stating distance and direction, such as 200 feet straight downward or upward to the northwest at a 45-degree angle, 300 feet. You can bring objects as long as their weight doesn't exceed what you can carry, and you can bring one willing creature of your size or smaller who's carrying gear up to its carrying capacity. It must be within 5 feet of you when you cast this spell. If you would arrive in a place already occupied by an object or creature, you and any creature traveling into each take 46 force damage, and the spell fails to teleport you. So you can't teleport into a wall and die, any kind of that Nightcrawler nonsense. You can teleport, and if it doesn't work, you know that it doesn't work immediately, and you take damage. You like that you can bring someone along. A lot of people, I always feel like, think they need to be touching the person. No, they just need to be within 5 feet of you, and you can carry stuff, which might be an opportunity for you to look into carry capacity. Now, it doesn't allow you to carry a person with you. You can only bring one person of your size or smaller, but you could carry a bunch of items, bunch of weapons, whatever the case may be, as long as you know what your carry capacity is. You hit that, and so can your ally that you bring with you. So you could bring a ton of stuff to a location. And it's just one of the most versatile teleportation spells, because the jump is basically like Misty Step at level 2 for a 30-foot bonus action. Yes, you need to see. Dimension Door, 500 feet at 4th level, and then basically you're jumping up to teleport the big boys at 7th level, and that has pretty crazy stuff that you're allowed to do. So I love Dimension Door. It's great to get into places, right? Like if you're like, I want to get into that bank vault, Dimension Door to the other side of the door. I want to get out of this situation. Hey, I got the thing we need to get from the dungeon. I want to go 500 feet straight up or 500 feet in that direction. Now I'm out of the dungeon, and I'm a pretty good head start to run away. Especially if you have more than one 4th level slot or slots above 4th level, and you can just chain dimension doors. 500 feet at a clip pretty much will allow you to flee and get out of any combat scenario and get yourself safe. Number 4. Galder's Speedy Courier. This is one that came to us from Lost Laboratory of Qualish, and it's only available for Warlocks and Wizards, and I feel like a lot of people probably don't know about it because it's from Lost Laboratory of Qualish, but I've never used this spell, but I can immediately think of a ton of ways in which it is ridiculously useful. So it's an action to cast, and it has a duration of 10 minutes, and that's important, and we'll read about it. Right? You summon a small air elemental to a spot within range, within 10 feet. It is formless, nearly transparent, immune to all damage, and cannot interact with other creatures or objects. Immune to all damage is important as well. It carries an open, empty chest whose interior dimensions are 3 feet on each side. While the spell lasts, you can deposit as many items inside the chest as will fit. Again, 3 feet on a side. You can then name a living creature you have met and seen at least once before, or any creature for which you possess a body part, lock of hair, clipping of nail, something like that, similar portion of the creature's body. As soon as the lid to the chest is closed, the elemental and the chest disappear, then reappear adjacent to the target creature. If the target creature is on another plane, or if it is proofed against magical detection or location, the contents of the chest reappear on the ground at your feet. The target creature is made aware of the chest's contents before it chooses whether or not to open it, and knows how much of the spell's duration remains before it retrieves the item. No other creature can open the chest and retrieve its contents. When the spell expires, or when all the contents of the chest have been removed, the elemental and the chest disappear. The elemental also disappears if the target orders it to return the items to you. When the elemental disappears, any items not taken from the chest reappear on the ground at your feet. When you cast this spell using an 8th level slot, you can send the chest to a creature on a different plane of existence. And it has a 25 gold piece material component, which is consumed by the spell. So think about how useful this could be in almost any mission you've ever been in. I'm sure it would be also ridiculously useful in real life as well, but you got to go do the fetch quest, right? You got to go get the thing and bring it to the guy. And then he'll validate it, and then blah, blah, blah. Well, if you need to do this, or you're trying to get something for somebody else or whatever, you get into the dungeon, you cast Galder's Speedy Courier, you drop the item in the box, you send it back. It's now where it needs to be. It didn't take you any time to do it, and it's done. This can be a way to have things go from you to NPCs, from you to other parties, for you to other party members. Lots of interesting options for this. Anything that can fit in the chest on 3 feet on a side. I think it does say it has to be items. Yeah, so you can't put a person in the chest. But they get to know what's in it before they open it. And yeah, I mean, this could be a great way to do some sort of like validation for like an adventuring guild in your game, right? They give you a scroll of Galder Speedy Courier. Your job is to go to this dungeon and extract this item. When you get the item, cast Galder, Speedy, Courier. It'll send the item back to the pay point contact, and then they will send a Galder, Speedy, Courier back to you in return with your payment. That way you can get whatever you need immediately where you are without having to trek all the way back to the town to then do the thing and then get it. You can just do it almost immediate. Instant transaction. This is your Amazon Prime drone in a spell. I love this. I love that if you happen to have 8th level spells, your planes of existence are no longer a problem. You can send stuff anywhere. I think it's really awesome, and I would love to get a chance to use it in a game. Number 3. Greater Invisibility. No one can argue that having the option to turn someone in the party invisible is not useful, because it is. But what if we could remove a lot of the negative detriments to the invisibility spell by, say, allowing you to still attack and cast spells while invisible? Well, that is what Greater Invisibility does. Yes, the duration is down to a minute from an hour, like previous, like regular invisibility. It is still touch range, and unfortunately, it doesn't have the ability to be upcast like invisibility does. But when you or a creature touch someone, they become invisible until the spell ends after that minute. Anything the target is wearing or carrying is invisible as long as it's on the target's person, which you notice the lack of if you attack or cast a spell, the invisibility ends. So, a lot of interesting options for this. You can see it's usable by bards, sorcerer, wizards, and then Underdark Circle, Druid, Archfey, Warlock, Undead, the new one from the UA, Warlock, the Armorer, Artificer, the Genie Warlock, and the Twilight Domain Cleric. This spell I think is a really great way for someone to cast it, someone in the back line to cast it on someone in the front line. Probably the rogue would be your prime target, since this will always give them advantage because they're invisible, therefore hidden from the enemy. Someone hiding in the back casts it on the rogue goes forward, the person in the back is concentrating on it, so even if they manage to hit the rogue who's invisible, it doesn't break the concentration. The rogue can still keep being invisible, making attacks at advantage and guaranteeing sneak attack. That's just one example of how Greater Invisibility can be used. I'm okay that it doesn't have an ability to be upcast, because I think that could be a little OP, and I think the designers knew that when they made it back 5 years ago. So, again, another spell that I always strive to have in my arsenal if I can have access to it. Number 2. Sickening Radiance. This spell is one of my absolute favorite damage-dealing spells, and it is just nasty. It is totally brutal, and it touches on something that I feel like is often not thought about. Radiant damage as radiation, essentially. So, radiant damage, a lot of people are always thinking of divine people, clerics, and so on, making attacks and smiting and sacred flame. But this is dim greenish light that spreads within a 30-foot radius sphere on a point you choose within range, which is 120 feet. The light spreads around corners, and it lasts until the duration ends, which is 10 minutes. So it's an action to cast out to 120 feet. 30-foot radius sphere, remember that's a 60-foot diameter sphere, 10-minute duration. Now again, it's a sickening green light, which to me automatically reminds me of like gamma radiation, right? Because we think of the Hulk with the green light, but it's a sickening, deathly light. But so it's not like a gas that can get blown away with a gust of wind spell, it is just a light source. When a creature moves into the spell's area for the first time or starts their turn there, they need to make a Constitution saving throw or take 4d10 radiant damage, suffer a level of exhaustion, and emit a dim greenish light in a 5-foot radius. The light makes it impossible for the creature to benefit from being invisible. The light and any levels of exhaustion caused by the spell go away when the spell ends. Okay, so it's available to sorcerers, warlock, and wizards. But let's go ahead and we'll pull up exhaustion here. So unfortunately, one of the downsides of it is a save for no damage, which is my biggest detriment to this spell, right? If you save on it, nothing happens, right? If you succeed, you take no damage and no detriment happens. I thought maybe you could do half radiant damage and nothing else happens, but it also sort of functions like a fairy fire in that this 60-foot, which is larger than a fairy fire, 60-foot radius sphere makes it so people can't be invisible. But let's take a look at exhaustion, right? So exhaustion, there's the 6 levels, right? Disadvantage on ability checks, speed is then halved, disadvantage on attack rolls and saving throws, hit point maximum is halved, speed reduced to 0, and death. The way I read this is if you can keep someone trapped in a Sickening Radiance for 6 turns, or however long, and they fail 6 saving throws against it, they get 6 levels of exhaustion, which leads to death. And I don't care that it says all levels of exhaustion go away when the spell ends, you're dead. The exhaustion levels can go away, but you're still dead. So this, I mean, it's the way in my mind it works the best is in a numbers game. Yes, a lot of monsters have good constitution, and some even have good constitution saving throws. So there's that. But if it's ultimately a numbers game and it's 10-minute duration, again, I've said it before, but if you can set yourself up in a scenario where you can trap somebody so they can't leave, and you drop a Sickening Radiance in there, man, it's a 60-foot radius sphere. Or sorry, 60-foot diameter sphere, 30-foot radius sphere. That's a large area. You could perceivably drop this in some place, shut all the doors, and trap someone inside if you're really trying to do brutal damage. And then just they have to make Constitution saving throws for 10 minutes. And chances are, the amount of Constitution saving throws they need to make in 10 minutes, they might fail 6 of them. And then they die. And then when your light ends, the other part of it is, again, in a like detective scenario, they were killed by light. That doesn't leave any marks. That doesn't leave any signs of foul play. So it has a lot of utility in that way. I've only ever gotten to use this once. Actually, no, I've never gotten a chance to use this. I've seen it used twice in campaigns that I ran. One, which was funnily enough, was against a Sararak in Tomb of Annihilation. And that room is not that big, so it did a serious number on him. I love this spell. I would love to see more people use it. I think it can be a lot of fun. Number 1. And probably surprising no one if you know anything about me and my love for paladins is Find Greater Steed. This was simultaneously one of my favorite and one of my most hated spells introduced in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. So, if you're familiar with paladins, they're the only class that technically gains access to the Find Steed series of spells. Find Steed at level 2, Find Greater Steed at level 4. And what they do is they do that thing where they give a paladin a mount, right? This was a thing that paladins always had, I feel like, in older editions, and it was like a class feature, and in here they made it a spell, which in some ways is almost better because you can continue to summon them. It takes 10 minutes to cast, so it's not something you're going to basically do in combat, but they last until they're basically dismissed or killed. So the creature sticks around for a while and can basically be a constant adventuring companion or a means to move around the battlefield. You summon a spirit that takes the form of a loyal, majestic mount, and Find Greater Steed gives you significantly more options than you would normally have. Your options are a griffin, a pegasus, a peryton, a direwolf, a rhinoceros, or a saber-toothed tiger. 3 of those have flight, which will allow you significantly more mobility than you would normally have. They all are pretty chunky and have a lot of interesting separate abilities, which we can touch on briefly. And the creature has the statistics provided in the monster manual for the chosen form, though it is either celestial, fey, or fiend, your choice. Keep this in mind, where it might allow you to get around certain banishment style spells or turning spells and so on, instead of its normal creature type. Additionally, if it has an intelligence score of 5 or lower, its intelligence is now 6, and it gains the ability to understand one language of your choice that you speak. So it's intelligent enough to understand how to do things. You control the mount in combat. While the mount is within 1 mile of you, you can communicate with it telepathically. While mounted, you can make any spell you cast that targets only you also target the mount. The mount disappears temporarily when it drops to 0 hit points or when you dismiss it as an action. Casting the spell again resummons the bonded mount with all of its hit points restored and any conditions removed. You can't have more than 1 mount bonded by this spell or the Find Steed spell at the same time. As an action, you can release the mount from its bond, causing it to disappear permanently. Whatever the mount disappears, it leaves behind any objects it was wearing or carrying. So there's a couple things I want to talk about. So part of the reason I said it's one of my most loved and most hated spells is I felt like a lot of folks were giving Find Steed credence to do things it didn't used to do, like allowing people to have a dire wolf or a polar bear or whatever as a steed for the Find Steed spell. But adding Find Greater Steed and leaving something like Dire Wolf as an option there sort of invalidates that concept and basically now says, in my mind, well, you need Find Greater Steed to summon these bigger, better things, which means that what a lot of people were allowing in a variety of games, not just one particular game, I saw this in multiple games, allowing a variety of options for folks with Find Steed, the normal version, and then Find Greater Steed kind of puts credence there to say, well, you probably should wait till you get 4th level spells to start doing that. So if we take a look at the Griffin real quick, we can kind of pull up each of these to just talk about why I think this spell is so good, and then something that's missing from Find Steed regular that I think might possibly be an oversight or an issue. So Griffins have advantage on perception checks based on sight. They do have multi-attack, and they do a decent amount of damage. They have dark vision. They have perception proficiency and a fly speed of 80 feet with a decent amount of hit points and armor class. Pegasus is about the same with an improved land speed and an improved fly speed. They don't have, they do have languages in general. They have a higher perception score. They also have proficiency with saving throws, which Griffins don't. And they do have their hooves, which is their only attack, no multi-attack, but it does 2d6 damage. The Periton is significantly weaker in the form of AC and hit points, lesser fly speed, but it does have bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing resistance from non-magical attacks, giving it more improved survivability. It also has the very popular flyby attack, which is it doesn't provoke an attack of opportunity when it flies out of an enemy's reach, but I don't feel like that matters if you're riding on it and it provokes no attacks of opportunity. Can the enemy still attack you while you're riding it? Keen sight for keen sight and smell, so advantage on checks, perception checks for sight and smell. Does have multi-attack for a gore and a talon attack, and if it dives at least 30 feet straight down toward the target and hits with a melee attack, it does an extra 2d8 damage. The Dire Wolf has a little bit more AC, also has stealth proficiency, keen hearing and smell, the very powerful pack tactics of advantage on an attack roll with an ally within 5 feet, and its bite attack can also knock someone prone. We have a Rhino, which has not as much hit points, or has decent hit points and an AC, but it has the charge feature to potentially deal extra damage and knock someone prone. And the Gore attack does 2d8, which is a little bit of higher damage. And the Saber-Tooth Tiger, which has the Pounce ability where it can move and make a claw attack. And if it knocks someone prone, it can make a claw attack as a bonus action. Also proficiency in perception and stealth. But the point I wanted to bring up is one thing that's missing from Find Greater Steed is this line. Your steed serves you as a mount both in and out of combat, and you have an instinctive bond that allows you to fight as a seamless fighting unit. This piece is missing, and I feel like a lot of people put a lot of credence into that. And what is a seamless fighting unit? I've seen most DMs in almost every game I've played in allow you to basically have a secondary character that is your steed that allows you to make attack rolls and do whatever needs to be done while you're using it. Have your warhorse make its hoofs attack, have your elk make its antler attack, whatever it is, rather than it just being a mount that allows you to move around and get a lot more mobility on the battlefield. Almost everyone allows you to have more offensive capabilities with it because of that fighting as a seamless fighting unit thing. Also not allowing you to have to make checks to handle your mount because of that. That specific line is missing from Find Greater Steed. And also the fact that the Find Greater Steed options are significantly more combat viable makes me feel like they should be able to fight in combat, but it's interesting that that seamless fighting unit bit is missing. So there you go, folks. There's my top 10 level 4 spells. Sorry, at the beginning I said it was going to be on Thursday. It's actually going to end up being on Friday because of everything else I had going on and more news and whatnot. But hey, I still got it done this week amidst everything else that was going on. So thank you again to my patrons over on Patreon for voting for this as our top 10 Tuesday for this week. Thank you to all of you for continuing to check out Nerd Immersion and driving up those numbers. We are approaching, getting close to 69,000, maybe even 70,000 soon. So we're on track to get me that play button for my birthday in July. Hey, you only turned 35 once, and I'd love to hit 100,000 subscribers to make that a reality. But you and sharing these videos with your friends and giving them thumbs up and whatnot are the only way that I can really make that happen. So I would appreciate any help you could provide. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.